Some towns were built around a river, some towns were built around a railroad, and some were built around one boss, one factory, one mine, one mill, one giant economic egg in one very flimsy basket. And for a while, that worked out just great. The paychecks rolled in, the diners stayed packed, the little league teams had sponsors, and everyone in town figured the good times were basically part of the landscape, like water towers, local radio stations, and one guy who still believes in chemtrails. Then one day the plant closed, the mine dried up, the orders stopped coming, the company left, and the whole town got hit with the kind of panic usually reserved for a guy who realizes his newborn has awfully curly black hair for Scandinavian parents. These weren't towns with backup plans. Today we're looking at 10 US towns that were built for a single industry that almost vanished overnight when the company left town. Some are still hanging on by pure stubbornness, some reinvented themselves, and some are basically one empty parking lot away from becoming a history lesson. Let's take a look. Number 9, Ketchikan, Alaska. Yes, that beautiful cruise port you probably stopped at if you've ever been on an Alaskan cruise didn't always depend on tourism to bring in the money. Nope, their main employer was a pulp mill. All that beautiful lumber just growing out there in the forest had only made sense. In Ketchikan, the depression fog didn't roll in quietly though. The day the mill shut down, it came in like a tidal wave. Now, if you've ever visited Southeast Alaska, you know Ketchikan sells you on beauty first. I mean, they got beautiful boats all around the place, spruce trees, mountains, water that looks really too cold to enjoy, but it's beautiful. For decades though, the real engine wasn't the scenery and cruise ships, it was the pulp mill. That was until March of 1997. The town was devastated when the Ketchikan Pulp Company closed its doors. The company was in Ward Cove and it started operating in 1954. Ward Cove is just outside of town a little bit. There's been new life put into that cove, more on that later. The town's biggest employer started off with cut hours, layoffs, and then the entire plant just closed its doors. What follows was the typical thing that you'll see in this list: missed paychecks, missed mortgage payments, and rent. For many, it was devastating. This is how bad it was. The employment rate in 1995, before the shutdown, was 4.5%. In 1997, it was 8.3%, the year the mill shut down. One Alaskan labor economist described it in plain terms. The mill closed in March of 1997 and hundreds of workers were hung out to dry. So why did it collapse so hard? The Ketchikan pulp operation was tied to larger forces, long-term timber arrangements in the Tongass area that were now costing a fortune, economic changes of pulp, and then of course political and environmental fights on how or whether longer contracts tearing down trees should go on. The result was a sudden, brutal reset. The legs of the local economy were chopped, and you could almost hear the echo in the harbor as the machines turned off. For most towns this far away from everything, it would have signaled the end of the town. It should be a ghost town. But after licking their wounds, Ketchikan decided they didn't want to become a ghost town. So they looked around and said, what else we got? Tourism is what they had, especially cruise traffic. And this they lean into in a big way because there's not a lot of roads heading into Ketchikan and they don't have a major airport, so how are people going to get there? Cruise ships. They built a nice port. They developed tourism around their past, which includes salmon runs and of course the timber industry. They actually have a lumberjack show in their own little stadium there in Ketchikan. This was the new economy of this town. The economy didn't heal after the shutdown, it mutated. And the people who stayed, they learned to live in an economy where the scenery finally started paying the rent. Now, I've been there a handful of times. I don't know if you've watched my cruise channel or any of my travel stuff, but I've taken the Alaskan cruise at least 5 or 6 times in the last handful of years. It is by far my favorite cruise, and they always end up in Ketchikan. Now, one thing I do have a problem with, that Ward Cove, which we talked about earlier, that is now where Norwegian Cruise Line ports their ships when they come into town, and you gotta take like a 20-minute bus ride into town from Ward Cove. It's not just an old pulp mill now, they've still got some of the old buildings, and they've kind of turned it into this thing. The first time I went there, it was just one old brick building, beautiful old building, and it was kind of where you waited to get on the buses to go into town, and there's a couple little shops inside the building and nothing real. Went there about 3 years later and it's turned into like a little mall where that building was. They got food, they got all kinds of shops, and you can go get on the buses to go into town. A couple times that's as far as we got was Ward Cove and that building, and it was pretty fun. We had a good time. Now, Now, other cruise lines like Disney, Princess, and I think Royal, they all go right into town with their cruise ships. Little cruise tip for you if you ever take the Alaskan cruise. Norwegian, you got a little bit of a drive, you want to go into Ketchikan. Now, even when the mill closed, they didn't lose that many people. In the 1990 census, they only had 8,200 residents, and in the 2001, 3 years after the mill shut down, they only were down to 7,922. So it wasn't a big drop, about 300 people. Since then, they've slowly worked their way up, and that 2000 census was the only time in their history that they've actually lost population. But on that day, they lost 516 workers. Number 8, Kannapolis, North Carolina. The day the company found out what bankruptcy really feels like. Kannapolis had a normal morning on July 30th, 2003. By the end of the day, they had the largest one-day job loss in North Carolina history. So let me paint the most terrifying kind of small-town math. You're not just losing a job, you're losing the job that explains why the town actually exists. On July 30th, 2003, Pillowtex announced bankruptcy and they ceased operations that day. In plain English, they were done, over, lights out. They were no more. A University of North Carolina write-up said that they lost over 4,800 jobs that day. Not long after that, the usual pattern started falling into place. The paychecks stop, then the rent gets late, then the car payment's late, and then the church has fundraisers, the diner's lunch crowd disappears, and people start calling moving trucks. There was actually a congressional hearing on this, and the transcripts of that hearing captured the shock with a clean before and after. The county that they're in, Cabarrus County, average unemployment rate at the time in 2002 and early 2003 was about 5.5%. In August of 2003, it was 9.7%. That's not an abstract statistic. That's a town's anxiety turning into a number. So like so many of these towns, they sat there and what are we gonna do type attitude. Luckily, they're in the Charlotte metro area, so they weren't as bad off as say Ketchikan in the last one when they're out there by themselves. The people had options in other towns nearby, but it still hurt the town. So Kannapolis also delivered a rare act 2 that doesn't feel like a fantasy. The landscape changed, literally. Old mill structures were moved, and the community responded by becoming a model that other places studied. The town eventually pivoted into research and development, which is a big thing in North Carolina these days. And it was sort of a turning point and became basically their modern identity. Number 7, Graniteville, South Carolina. At 2:39 a.m. on January 6, 2005, Graniteville heard the sound no town wants to hear, a metal-on-metal collision on the railroad tracks, followed by the kind of gas you can't outrun. Graniteville's story is a reminder that industrial collapse isn't always slow. Sometimes it's an event. Loud, sudden, and possibly toxic. On January 6, 2005, 2 freight trains collided near Graniteville, releasing chlorine gas into the community. Fatalities and mass medical treatment followed. The derailment didn't just harm the residents, it damaged the industrial ecosystem already fighting global competition. So the textile industry in the US was under pressure, and the wreck hit Avondale's key plant at exactly the wrong time. By 2006, Avondale announced it would close its plants, and reports described how the shutdown would put roughly 1,900 South Carolinians out of work around Graniteville, with about 4,000 jobs affected across multiple states. Imagine being a 4th-generation mill family. You know, your grandparents worked at this place. Their hands were on the same machines you're working on. Then suddenly the machines are rusted by corrosive gas, and the company says it's done. Whether you believe the derailment was the primary cause or a fatal final blow, it becomes the story people tell. One official says, "We were handling competition, we couldn't handle this." So what does Graniteville look like now? Smaller, quieter, and still living with overlap of public health memory and economic loss. It's not like some tidy redemption arc, you know, they didn't have some rebound where now they're doing better. It's more like they learned to carry the scars. What happens when your industry dies because your town got poisoned? I remember reading about this when it happened years ago, and it was devastating to this community. I mean, it was a mill town. The mill built most of the homes here. This town didn't die though. I was actually watching one news report that they had built a new school there a few years back. That's usually a sign a community is starting to grow again, meaning they've got more kids. Maybe they still lost population as people moving out, but more families are moving in if they're needing another school or a rebuilt school. Anyway, it's too bad. That's a pretty part of South Carolina, not too far from Augusta, Georgia. Number 6, Newton, Iowa. In late October 2007, the Maytag man packed up and left Newton, delivering a gut punch to the whole town. Newton's brand used to be simple. Build things that live in your kitchen for 15 years and they never complain. That identity wasn't abstract. It had a logo and a gate. When the Maytag era ended and the company decided to close the plant down, the community had to figure out something brutal. How do we replace jobs that supported the entire middle class routine? The closure removed 1,800 direct jobs, severely impacting the town which once was known as the washing machine capital of the world. This was truly a company town. Mom might have been a secretary, dad worked the second shift, your cousin works QA. You hear things like, my first car came from a paycheck for making washers. When the plant closes, those personal timelines snap. It wasn't just Newton, it was the surrounding counties too. The unemployment rate shot through the roof. The plant's closure caused a significant decline in the local economy, reduction in school rankings, and a shift in the job market. Now, Newton's kind of out by itself. It's about a 35-minute drive outside of Des Moines. So if you're working in Newton and now all of a sudden you got to find a job in Des Moines or someplace else, you got a little drive. The community was kind of, in a way, destroyed, or at least the way it used to be was. Prior to the closure, they had an unemployment rate that was 5.1%. That was in 2006. In December of 2007, after the closure, it was up to 7.4%, and throughout 2008, it was 7.8% unemployed. Newton's present-day twist is that it didn't become a cautionary ghost story. The population held fairly steady between 2010 and 2020, according to the census, and the town still sits in a strange space, proud of what they built, still processing what they lost, and constantly trying to diversify so a single corporate decision can't decapitate the local economy again. As if the job loss and the devastation of the community wasn't bad enough, they've still got a major park called Maytag Park. But that must have been rough. I mean, everyone loses jobs, then you got a 2 million square foot factory complex that was just left vacant, with some parts of it being repurposed later, but still. Number 5, Millinocket, Maine. When Millinocket's mill shut down, the town didn't just lose jobs, it lost the sound that told everybody what time it was. Yes, this was a mill town. They had the whistle and everything. Just like you see in the old 1950s and 60s movie, when the plant is, work over for the day, they blow the big whistle. Millinocket is one of those places where the industry wasn't near the town. The industry created the town. A paper mill called Great Northern Paper shaped housing, schools, and the rhythm of life. When the mill closed in 2008, the loss wasn't theoretical, it was immediate and personal. The local reporting from 2008 captures the scene in blunt detail. The closure was expected to mean 208 people would lose their jobs, and the shutdown timeline was fast enough that workers were told directly as it unfolded. This is a town that had less than 5,000 people at the time. That's a nightmare number to a small region, because every one of those jobs is also the grocery bill, a heating oil tank, or a kid's sports registration. It couldn't have been a pretty sight. Cold Maine mornings, empty parking lots, and a downtown that suddenly has more for sale signs than snowbanks. The unemployment storyline also tracks the wider recession-era pain. The county's unemployment rate in 2007 was 5.6. In 2008, it jumped up to 8.4. What's Millinocket like now? It's smaller than it was in 2010, according to the U.S. Census, but it's also actively working on redevelopment. Government and local leaders continue to position the former mill site as an asset for cleanup and future use. In 2025, the EPA statement explicitly referenced the 2008 shuttering as a moment Millinocket lost its major industry and sought diversification afterwards. They still have some businesses there and some manufacturing, obviously things to do with lumber and forestry, but they still haven't caught up to what they lost. Number 4, Canton, North Carolina. Canton didn't get a slow goodbye. It got a corporate announcement, a deadline, and a town holding its breath until the last whistle. If you want a modern version of an industry collapsed overnight, Canton is the blueprint. On March 6, 2023, Pactiv Evergreen announced plans to shut down the paper mill at the end of June. Fast, clean, and devastating in a place that's been a paper town for more than a century. If you've never heard of Canton, it's in the mountains west of Asheville, not too far away. And this paper mill was the heart of the town. It's like dead center in town, right on the Pigeon River. This place was almost a movie character. It had a soundtrack, the whistle, a reputation, a mill town, and a complicated relationship with its neighbors downstream. A lot of pollution legacy there. Now here's the plot twist. The same mill that provided wages also left environmental consequences, and the closure set off two emotions at once: mourning in Canton, relief and cautious hope elsewhere. The immediate aftermath was measurable. About 1,100 employees in the region were impacted. That's the official release number, but they think it was closer to 1,500 were affected because of, supporting businesses in the area. When you lose that many jobs in a town of about 4,500, it hurts. They got West Canton there too, but still, that's a lot of jobs to lose for that low of a population. As far as I can tell, the mill still sits empty to this day. I saw one news report that in 2024 they were talking to another company to purchase the mill. This one's new. It's, fairly fresh story, so it still stings this community. If you've never been to this part of North Carolina, I would encourage you to go. Go see Asheville. I'm sure it's gotten a lot better since the big hurricane a few years ago, but this isn't too far outside of town, and this is one of the most beautiful parts of this country. Number 3, Kayenta, Arizona. Kayenta didn't watch the industry fade, it watched it run out of customers. Kayenta sits in the kind of landscape that makes you feel small, but economically the town's story is about something that made people feel stable, steady work tied to coal. Yes, believe it or not, they have coal out west too. It's not just in Kentucky and West Virginia and Pennsylvania. But the catch was devastatingly simple. The Kayenta mine fed the Navajo Generation Station. One customer, one pipeline. Well, the owners of the plant decided they were going to switch to a more affordable natural gas. They didn't need coal anymore. The mine didn't have any other customers. Kayenta sits on the Navajo reservation, and that's where all the workers came from. A 2019 report described the layoffs in blunt language. At least 265 workers at the Kayenta coal mine were being laid off that month. As the station's shutdown approached, it noted the mine had already shrunk from roughly 350 workers the prior year, and it would keep only a token force for cleanup. It's unfortunate. I mean, coal has seen its day. There'll always be a need for coal, but not like we used to need coal. That coal money isn't just money. It is the groceries, the school supplies, and the sense that your hometown has a place in the wider world. When the layoffs hit, the surrounding communities feel it fast, especially because alternative employers at similar wages are scarce in rural areas, and especially on a reservation. This is a town that was already struggling with a pretty high unemployment rate. I mean, in 2018, it was 8.2%. Before the mill shut down, it was 8%, and that was in 2019. By 2020, 11.7% of the population was unemployed. The pandemic mattered here, but the coal losses meant the region entered that period already weakened. So what does a town do when it only has a few months to figure out what their next step was? They still haven't fully figured that out yet. Number 2, Rockdale, Texas. Rockdale's story is what happens when a town is built for power-hungry industry, and then the power-demanding industry stops needing your town. In 2008, Alcoa Incorporated shut down its primary smelting operation at its aluminum plant in Rockdale, Texas, citing critical power supply issues and rising energy costs. The move resulted in the immediate layoff of about 660 workers. When a major industrial employer goes cold, you start looking around to see what's next. That's a lot of people. But Alcoa officially blamed unstable and unreliable power supplies, specifically citing issues following Hurricane Ike and disputes over electricity contracts. However, during a board meeting, they said it was really just a cost-saving measure during a broader industry downturn. I mean, this was during the 2008 thing, so this type of thing was going on all across the country. And Rockdale's kind of out there by itself. It's about an hour northeast of Austin. And for the longest time, they just had this massive plant that was doing nothing. Now, some things have kind of moved in there, like a data center and a Bitcoin mining thing, but nothing that's going to bring back 660 jobs. This might be a pretty good place to retire. I was looking at what's going on there on Zillow. There are plenty of homes for about $150,000 that look like they're livable. Like I always say, I'm not in there checking the pipes and the wiring to make sure it's, a good house, but they look like they're in decent shape. There's some that are for $60,000 that you might want to think twice about, but it's still there available for you. The downtown area has a lot of for lease signs to this day. Whole bunch of empty storefronts. Here's how bad it got. The unemployment rate in 2007 before the shutdown was 4.2%. It creeped up to 5.4% in 2008. By 2009, it was 10.9%. All right, before we get to number 1, if you have not subscribed to this channel, we'd appreciate if you did, but what really matters right now, according to YouTube, is if you give the video a big thumbs up and a like. Really appreciate it. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, Ferndale, Washington. Ferndale's industry story is basically, if your business runs on cheap electricity, the wrong price change can shut the whole town's lights off, economically speaking. Ferndale's a little town in northwest Washington that you pass through on your way to the Canadian border. If you're on the 5 freeway and you sneeze, you'll miss the place. It's not that big, even though it has a population of almost 16,000 residents. But Ferndale sits in a region where heavy industry has long been drawn by infrastructure, ports, logistics, and power. The collapse year here was 2020, an era when industrial operations across the country faced market volatility and energy cost realities. This was going throughout the country, not just Washington, not just out west. The dramatic part of this story is how fast this stable community went idle. A shutdown doesn't feel like a business correction. It feels like someone hit pause on the town's main engine. In 2020, the major industrial shutdown in Ferndale, Washington was the Alcoa aluminum smelter. Again, our old pal Alcoa, which officially slowed and ended operations in July of that year. The closure was due to unfavorable market conditions, specifically falling metal prices and high energy costs. Now, Ferndale, again, is not that big. And with that shutdown, they lost 700 workers. And then there was kind of a domino effect for other businesses going out too. So after being mothballed in 2020 and officially closed in 2023, Alcoa began demolishing the 1,600-acre site in late 2025. Several notable industrial and local business closures have recently occurred and are currently underway in Ferndale, Washington as of March 2026. So this one's fresh. Now this one took a hit, but they kind of recovered. In 2019, the unemployment rate was 4.3, which was pretty close to what was going on in the rest of the nation. But in 2020, it jumped to 9%. Then it dropped back down to 5.4% in 2021. So that's good. The town's population trend is another surprise. Ferndale grew strongly between 2010 and 2020, and the 24 estimate is higher still. So it's kind of a weird one. The town didn't totally collapse, but a major employer disappeared almost overnight. All right, I want to know what you think about this one. Have you ever been part of one of these where a company just shut down on you? I'd love to hear about it in the comment section. All right, everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.